Additions or corrections? Is there a second? Moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? The minutes have been approved. Item 3 on the agenda is to receive the MAPS 3 revenue and expenditure report. David?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chairman. You have in your packet the MAPS 3 revenue and expenditure report ending November 30th, 2012. It's in the usual form that you're used to seeing. For the month, sales tax revenues $8,323,716, about 0.54% over target, and with the interest of $106,077 and other revenues of $2,300 for a total of $8,432,093. That brings us to total on the fiscal year $44,389,586, and then total for the program $248,555,056. On the expenditure side, you can see the various expenditures for each of the programs. For the month, the total is $753,901. Fiscal year, $4,559,785. And then total for the program, $17,427,125. Can answer any questions you might have.
I don't have any questions. I move approval.
All in favor? Opposed? It has been approved. Item number 4, recommend resolution approving change order number 1 and amendment number 1 for MAPS 3 Oklahoma State Fairgrounds Phase 1 improvements, preliminary site grading, increase of $11,160 at project M3F001.
Madam Vice Chairman, this is a change order and amendment for Fairgrounds project. As you know, as we go through construction projects, we often run into small issues. This is both a change order and an amendment. The contract had itemized amounts for various things, but there were also some things that have come up that we needed to add to that. So for the change order, there was a vault cover for a water meter that was uncovered during the grading operations, and same thing with the storm sewer line demolition. There was a storm sewer that was buried under that area that we didn't know about. There was, as far as the amendment part of the item, there was an AT&T line that wasn't as deep as we'd expected, so they altered the grading a little bit so that they could provide the cover that we needed. So there's additional borrow of $4,320, but then there's an excavation credit of $1,800. So for the total, that brings us to $11,160, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions? Is there a motion? Second? All in favor? Opposed? Been passed. Item number 5, a recommended resolution approving contract for architectural services with Frankfurt Short Burza Associates, PC for MAPS 3 Oklahoma State Fairgrounds, Phase 2, new expo building, fee of $3,545,800, and assigning testing laboratories, which is project M3F002.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chairman. This is a contract for architectural services for the new expo building out at the fairgrounds. This is very similar to all the A&E contracts that we've done before, went through the same process, through the interviews. The subcommittee did not have a quorum yesterday, so what you have as a handout is a revised memo. The revision was that we had a paragraph in there that says the MAPS 3 Oklahoma State Fairgrounds Subcommittee recommended approval. They did discuss it, and Mr. Neeling might want to discuss that more, but that is the reason for the revised memo. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Okay, Bob.
And I would just add that because we didn't have a quorum, we couldn't take official action to approve, but the 5 members of the committee who were there did discuss it. I did talk with Tim O'Toole, who was intimately involved in the negotiation of the contract, and he had no problem with it and favored it. He was unable to be there, so We didn't take an official vote, but there was no dissent among the committee with regard to the contract. So committees or subcommittees function as one of recommendation, and while it doesn't come with an official recommendation, I can tell you there was no dissent in the committee discussion.
I make a motion that we approve this as submitted as well.
All in favor? Opposed? Recommendation has been passed. Item number 6, recommended resolution approving amendment number 1 to contract for engineering consulting services with Jacobs Engineering Group, Inc. for MAPS 3 Modern Streetcar Transit Project, no fee increase, project M3S003.
Madam Vice Chairman, this is a contract with Jacobs Engineering to help us with the analysis and ongoing issues with the transit project. The contract with Jacobs is broken in 2 parts. It has task part, and it has essentially reimbursable expenses. And those were somewhat estimated when we began the project. There's 3 work orders that are presently involved in this. And as we integrated the federal monies that we've been able to obtain and use that with some of the tasks that they need to do, we have determined that the hourly and task part of it needs to be decreased and the reimbursable part of it needs to be increased. So that's why there's no increase in the total fee. We're essentially moving money from pocket A to pocket B. And I'll be glad to answer any questions.
I'd just like to say that the subcommittee reviewed this and approved recommendation to the City Council. It's simply moving fund from one contract line item number to another in the contracts. I would make a motion that we approve the resolution.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion has been passed. Item 7, presentation on MAPS 3 Downtown Public Park Draft Master Plan Development and Phase 1 Improvements Project, Project M3P006.
As we have been working very hard on the park projects, we've had a lot of meetings. We've had 2 public meetings. We have our 3rd tonight. And we're bringing to you today the presentation from Hargraves and Associates that they've given to the subcommittee and some of the focus groups have seen, wanted you to see it. So I'd like to invite Mary Margaret Jones to the front here to talk to you about the park.
Thank you, David, and thank you, committee. We're very pleased, and there you see the presentation. We're very pleased to be here for our 3rd public meeting this evening, and we met with our park subcommittee yesterday and also gave an informational presentation to the transit subcommittee yesterday. As David mentioned, we have had dozens of meetings, as well as the large public meetings. We've had dozens of meetings with stakeholders and interest groups and focus sessions with people who have particular interests. I'm going to call on a couple of my colleagues, at least one, I think at least Candace. I'll do the architecture part, but we're going to try and keep this brief because I realize you have a full agenda. So this is what all we're addressing in the presentation. This is where we are in the schedule. We will be presenting or submitting a master plan in April. We did postpone our public meeting. Our 3rd public meeting was originally scheduled to be before Christmas, but we moved it until tonight, basically to give a chance for the Convention Center team to sort of catch up a little bit and for us to collaborate with the Convention Center team some, because there are issues that impact us both, and it made sense for us to meet, which we have done. Public input, you've seen this before. We asked for public input in terms of the elements that were desired within these categories. We keep this as a checklist to make sure we're fulfilling all that we can with the aspirations within the aspirations for the park. We had 3 schemes, which we showed you last time, 3 very different approaches to how we might develop the park, and we received input on all 3 of those, and basically got comments like, We like the lake, but maybe in this scheme, this alternative one, it's too small. We like the way the program is distributed in the park, but perhaps there needs to be more in the lower park, and perhaps the promenade connection to the river needs to be clearer, not the meandering walk you see here, like the Big O lawn, event lawn, whereas in this scheme, alternative number 2, maybe the lake is too big, and maybe addressing the boulevard with one big plaza is too much paving, but we like the way the promenade connects to the river. And in Scheme 3, we miss having a lake. We think there should be a lake, but we do like the way the lower park addresses its neighbors. The pathway is sort of fanning out and embracing the neighborhoods surrounding the park. So we took those inputs to those 3 and came up with a synthesis plan that takes the best of each of those. It distributes the programming throughout the park because it's important that we have an active and dynamic park, but it does emphasize the relationship to downtown and the relationship to the convention center and the 100%, what we call the 100% corner at Robinson and the Boulevard. So the Big O event lawn is there. A cafe in the future would address the boulevard. And then it decreases in terms of amount of activity as you get closer and closer to the river. So at the river edge, it's more of wetland gardens and prairie gardens and those kinds of natural amenities. So you see here a zoning diagram, the plan, with red being the most active, green being passive. You see a plan without the trees, and then you see a plan with the trees. And you see connection. I want to just highlight a couple of things. You see a connection to Manuel Perez Park in the lower park. We have met with leaders of the Latino community and are very committed to making amenities in the downtown park that can leverage that adjacency and help raise the level of awareness of the Manuel Perez Park. We also are proposing multi-use fields and court sports adjacent to the Latino Community Development Agency and the Little Flower Church, which will be a great synergy of uses for those two community facilities. And then in the upper park, I want to mention in particular the Union Station and the importance Union Station has as a jewel within this park, and the ways it can be reused are quite phenomenal in terms of the opportunity, and we feel very strongly in our recommendations that building needs to be restored and programmed and integrated into the park. A lake, as you see, that's big enough for recreational boating, paddle boating, so that it can be used, and then the event lawn, as we talked about before, and various children's play areas, as we talked about before, and adult play areas. This is the landscape diagram of the park, and I only want to pause here for a minute to make a point that we are trying to make this park very much specific to Oklahoma. A rich landscape with 70 acres. We're able to create a landscape, a big landscape, and a landscape that is about Oklahoma. So you see a mix of landscape types that will lead to that diversity. So in this aerial view, looking from downtown toward the river, you see all those components I just discussed, focusing for a minute on the boulevard edge and the 100% corner at Robinson and the Boulevard, where we're showing a notion of a big interactive civic fountain, lit lighting, a big plaza, a gathering space. Imagine with the Chesapeake Arena's improvements and their new plaza on the opposite corner, imagine when the thunder winds, tens of thousands of people spilling out of the arena and filling into this park and onto the event lawn. The event lawn is 6 times the size of the lawn in Myriad Gardens, so it can host very large events, and that's the idea. And then the boulevard gardens along the boulevard, the cafe along the boulevard, and adult play along the boulevard, and then children's play behind the Great Lawn and adjacent to the lake. So that 100% corner, just highlighting that with the Great Lawn and the promontory hill will be 25 feet high, so it'll be a topographic marker in the city and a destination in and of itself. The fountain, as I mentioned, gardens, as I mentioned, lots of color, lots of richness there. So that view, and you can see in the upper corner of your slide, you see the little red viewing cone. You're standing at the apex of that triangle. So this is looking into the park from that corner. You can see an idea of an interactive fountain. You see the hill in the background. And you see the scale of that great lawn and the hill and the stage. And you see the scale of that great lawn compared to Myriad Gardens as a scale comparison overall and as a scale to the Grand Lawn in Myriad Gardens. We're often asked, how is this park different? Why do we need this one as well? And here's a good example of how and why. It allows such a different diversity of uses and is quite different in feeling. In this park, and you're now standing on the promontory looking back at the skyline, you get this sort of awesome perspective of the skyline because you're just outside of it rather than being sort of in the shadow of the skyline. So it allows that relationship. The cafe and the stage were on our team is Butzer Gardner Architects, and they're working on a vocabulary that says welcome, it says hearth, it says fireplace, it says gatherings. You see the cafe has a vertical element, and they're drawing from the heritage of the early settlements of Oklahoma. And when all the settlers arrived and their campfires were lit at night, suddenly there was this array of these lit tents at night. So the idea of hearth, the idea of warmth, welcoming, and shade. So that you think about shade structure being almost more important than the cafe itself. And we feel it's really important that to get the idea of the cafe right. It's not a white tablecloth restaurant. And in first phase, it might be food trucks. The idea is to get activity, energy, a buzz, and something that's local and appropriate to the market and that will succeed. That's a very important part of our planning. So the rest of the upper park, including Union Station, is mostly woodlands, lots of shade, the lake, as I mentioned, and children's play, spray ground, et cetera. So if you're standing on top of that promontory, you look the other way, and you see across the lake, and you see Union Station and in all its beauty, and you see Skydance Bridge. So boating on the lake, very important. Wetland edges with rich diversity, again, of landscape types and plant materials. Children's play, water, climbing, and then Union Station and the asset it brings in terms of the ways it can be used. It's quite big. So right away the two meeting halls could be restored to become a place for weddings, and imagine those weddings spilling into this beautiful landscape. Again, the idea of the woodland as we move to the lower park. And woodland gardens as destinations within that landscape, not throughout, because we want views through the park, we want an openness to the park, we want it to feel safe, secure, and welcoming, but we want places of real rich landscape diversity. So this is the view from the other corner. This is from Hudson and the Boulevard. You enter into a very different kind of character, one into shade and big trees and beautiful landscape. So that's the model, which is also here in the table. And that's the long-term vision for the whole thing. Then moving to the lower garden, I mentioned some of the features of program in the lower garden or uses in the lower park and the relationship to the river and recreation. Natural landscape, a respite really from the downtown environment. And you see in this view from the lower park, looking north, you see Skydance Bridge and the Devon Tower, but you're in a very natural environment. But you still see the edges, so it still has an openness that makes it feel safe. And the kinds of uses that we can have happening in a gazebo and a plaza adjacent to Manuel Perez Park. So, very important. We've been meeting with bicyclists and coalitions who want to use the park in various ways, and we have high-speed bicycle ways, we have shared ways between bicyclists and pedestrians, and then we have trails that are strictly pedestrian. So a full array of ways to move through the park and links of paths, so you could plan your run for how long you want to run or how much distance you want to cover. The promenade is what ties downtown all the way to the river. Along the promenade, these beautiful lights that will be beautiful in the day and at night, custom benches, people biking, the Spokies you see here in the image, and the promenade connecting right up onto Skydance Bridge in a way that is not able to happen today, but will be able to happen when the promenade and the park are built. The idea of these iconic lights marching all the way down that promenade, connecting river core to shore. And sustainability, we showed you these last time, so I won't go into detail, but managing stormwater on the site, alternative sources of energy, using the water table to supplementing the water table and then using that for the lake and for irrigation, capturing our runoff to make that possible. We're also looking at ways of using our Phase 1 funds to the best advantage. This is not finalized yet, but and this was the mandate given to us by MAPS, but we're thinking that we have certain considerations, of course, like where the utilities are. They're all over the place right now. We're looking at ways to consolidate the utilities. And then we're looking at a way of going ahead and creating the event space, if we can, in Phase 1, so that Phase 1 can begin to generate revenue and activity in the park. So we're trying to build as little as possible in a temporary way. We're trying to build what we can in a permanent way so we don't rebuild it later. So these are the Phase 1 analyses that we're doing now and working closely with David and his team to figure out how to make this happen. One thing I want to point out, we probably will not in Phase 1 be able to afford the big civic fountain and our art piece and our lighting piece in the corner plaza. So this corner plaza probably will be a temporary plaza in Phase 1, but the Boulevard Gardens and the Great Lawn and the promontory we hope to be a permanent improvement. So I'm going to ask Candace to talk for 2 or 3 minutes about some of the issues we're investigating on economics.
So I think it's worth spending 10 seconds talking about why we're even having this conversation. So what we're finding all over the country, and I suspect that you will find as you move forward with all these projects, is that there is increasing willingness and interest on the part of civic bodies in investing in these kinds of things that brand cities, that create economic development, that help create new neighborhoods and taxable value for cities. But thinking through the operations piece increasingly means thinking about generating new forms of revenue aside from the general fund. And that all these kinds of civic investments are being asked or being challenged to dream up governance structures and sources of operating funding that can support them after the public has made the initial capital investment. We're also finding across the country that properly managed with sustained civic advocacy and a vision that guides creation of the park, that parks create real value. In some places, very significant increments in value, but that sustained vision, advocacy, and a competent management structure is absolutely essential to seeing the value created, which is important because over the first generation of the park's operation, you're likely to see operating costs equal to or in excess of the capital costs that you invested in them. Operations of these kinds of signature parks is frankly significant. So in this chart, you're looking at green bars that are initial capital cost and blue bars that are the 20-year present value of operations cost that's seen in a variety of new parks across the country. The only exception to that rule is Millennium Park, and the reason is because that's a big, giant parking garage underneath the park on the capital side. So as cities think about where these new sources of funds are going to come from, they're looking at a range of potential sources ranging from essentially new ways of diverting public revenue through special assessments and bids, all the way to more private forms of fundraising, including tapping into real estate value, looking to corporate philanthropy and sponsorships. And then in between, there's a variety of earned income ideas that people play with. Where on the spectrum you are, in which sources of funding work, is very much a function of what the specific park is supposed to do. Is it supposed to create a new downtown? Is it supposed to create a postcard of your city? What are the goals? And then what do local culture, law, and regulation support? Here, I think that given the goals that have been established for this park, you're very likely to be looking at tapping into the value of the real estate that this park will create over time. And that over time, we think, and we're going to tee up as part of a menu of options, you'll be looking significantly to revenue that's achievable from a new bid or HOA that could be established around the park, or which could be an extension of the existing downtown bid. That source of revenue, though, is going to take time to accrue, and the challenge, therefore, is to think through where's the source of revenue for the initial phase of engagement. We've been looking very hard, consistent with the design for Phase 1, at the potential to generate revenue from events. You certainly have a sweet spot here because you don't have in this area a quality event venue that can support this, that is of the size that the Hargraves team is proposing to design. There's no 20,000 person event venue of quality in this region. And if you look at other mid-sized cities across the country, including in this region, there are a host of cities that are supporting venues of that size, and there are local event producers who believe that Oklahoma City could support such a venue. Other similarly sized cities with venues of that nature are seeing venues that support, 10 to 15, as many as 20 or 30 events. We think that as a starting point, you could do 5 large events in a new venue in this park in the short term, and that's a judgment that's confirmed by local event producers. Now, how you manage events is going to be critically important to the achievement of revenue. There are a host of different ways of organizing events and thinking about how active a park operator wants to be in production. The more actively involved you are, the more money you make, also the more risk you take on. And so thinking through that risk-revenue profile and what makes most sense for the operator of this park will be important to think through in the coming weeks. I say that because other sources of earned income in this park are likely to be fairly small. The other kinds of earned income that are implied by what Mary Margaret showed you, boat rentals and bike rentals and the cafe or food truck operation, will, we think, if managed well, break even, but are unlikely to be major sources of operating revenue. So you're looking, in the first instance, to the events and potentially to parking revenue associated with events, then potentially to corporate sponsorships. We don't think that this is going to be a place where you're going to see national corporate sponsorship in the short term because there's not enough density, there aren't enough eyeballs on the park, but you certainly could be looking to local civically engaged philanthropists who would want to brand elements of the park as being associated with their park, which suggests, though, that at least for the first 10 to 20 years of the park's operation, there will have to be some level of public support in the mix. Events plus parking plus some modest other kinds of earned income, plus philanthropy, plus some level of public support. And we will also be thinking through in the coming weeks how that public support can be delivered in a way that is palatable in the local political context, looking, for instance, at various kinds of fees associated with visitation to the area. Over time, of course, you would expect to see that public support drop off as other sources of revenue come in.
Thank you. And I should have introduced Candace a little more fully. That's Candace Damon with our Economic Advisors, HR&A. Part of our scope is to come up with strategies, possible strategies for you as we complete the master plan. So I just want to conclude by saying that we are doing a great deal of coordination with other projects that touch us and affect us and vice versa. David has been organizing these fantastically productive coordination sessions and collaboration sessions where we're working with the team members for these other efforts. So transit, the Boulevard, the Convention Center, and the Alliance development planning efforts. So we're all working together and making great strides in terms of coming up with the best solutions for all those. And so I real quickly want to touch on the Boulevard. As part of that effort, we've all been talking about the nature of the Boulevard, and we were tasked to draw that up. And we're proposing that the Boulevard take on a transition character in the blocks between the Convention Center site and the park site, so that it narrow down, so that in that zone it becomes more plaza-like than road-like. It still accommodates cars, but it feels like a place for people. So the median goes away as you make a transition coming from east and west at Hudson and Robinson. We pave it like a plaza. We make it as narrow as we possibly can, and therefore as friendly and open as we can to pedestrian movement. So if you're approaching from the east, you see the planted median, and then as you get to Robinson, you see that planted median disappear and become a plaza that almost makes it feel like you're driving through the park instead of adjacent to the park. These are our proposals. They are still being reviewed by engineers, but we just wanted to fill you in on progress of our thinking, and at least to talk about the goal, which is to make a street that could at times possibly be even used for events. And you can set up, on that kind of cross-section of road, you can set up a plaza, an event like you see here, which is similar to how Festival of the Arts sets up. And you see this example of one of our projects in Baton Rouge where the street doesn't even feel like a street, and it feels like an extension of the adjacent plaza and park. And that's the goal of where we're headed as a big group of coordinating designers. That concludes my presentation. If anybody has any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. That was a great presentation. I appreciate that. You mentioned a couple of ideas for how some of the open spaces could be used or how the Union Station could be used. Can you maybe expand a little bit more on that? And also, do you know if the city would have any kind of mechanism for influencing what types of activities might be fostered there?
Well, yes. I mean, the answer would be yes to the latter. Typically, and we'll be making recommendations about governance of this park as well. Typically, these kinds of signature parks have a conservancy board, and the city is part of that conservancy board as well as others, and that conservancy board would be overlooking things like the programming of the park. And there would be staff programming the park. So there would be people coming up with ideas, being creative about ways to use the park, and then making sure they happen, and then making sure they're appropriate. So these kinds of parks need that kind of active programming. The kinds of things we see happening, imagine free movies on Friday night, imagine ballroom dancing in the park, imagine big events with music, imagine food festivals, imagine bocce, petanque, that's becoming more and more popular in other parks around the city. Chess, checkers, then in the active recreation areas, basketball, pick-up soccer. We're not proposing fields with fences and lights and stadiums, but we're certainly making fields big enough for pick-up games of soccer, frisbee, running, biking. It's all the kinds of things and then the boating on the lake, so paddle boating on the lake. And children's play. Children for, all ages to play in the park. That answer your question? Sure. Thanks. Anybody else?
Mary Margaret, I just want to say that I think this is the 5th time I've seen this presentation. And
Pretty soon you can give it.
And I haven't run out of wows.
Okay.
I mean, every time I look at it, I find another part that really makes this distinctly Oklahoman.
Great.
And I also am beginning to realize that in this instance, we can have our cake and eat it too. Not only, I think, if we hired a brilliant force with Hargraves, but also with everybody that you bring along to the table. We get a whole package. Not only do we get a design on the park, but we get the type of infrastructure and guidance that the city needs to take it from day 1 to hopefully day 5,000. So,
Right.
Job well done.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
I'd like to add that we do have a public meeting tonight, 6 o'clock, for a lot of what you've seen here, but it's a public interactive meeting at the Ronald Norick Library, 6 p.m. on the 4th floor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that presentation. On item number 8, discussion action authorizing staff to negotiate a contract amendment to the landscape architectural service contract for MAPS Downtown Public Park Master Plan Development, Project M3P006.
Madam Vice Chairman, this is an item that came from the subcommittee, an idea that they had in the discussions and working through all that we have with the park, that Hargraves be engaged to do some more design that's outside of the park proper that we've come to know as the MAPS 3 Park, but it would be that river edge from approximately Robinson to Walker, so that they could do master planning in that area to help how that would interact with the park. It's not for design. We don't have MAPS 3 funds to do any construction, but the discussion was that they would be engaged to do master planning of that area. And I might turn it over to Ms. Lowe if she might want to expand some more.
Thank you. In our many discussions, as we began to realize that the park was going to have to interact with not only several of the MAPS projects, but certainly Project 180, different entities within Public Works, and obviously one of the most important elements, the river itself. The actual downtown park really doesn't totally connect from Quarter Shore. The park, South Park, ends at Southwest 13th, and you can walk across the street and be in a riverfront park. And it didn't take Hargraves long to realize that that element of the park property was critical in actuating a few things. As we see river development to the east with the wonderful things that are going on in our Boathouse district, and now with the announcement of the Humphreys moving forward with plans for the downtown park, east meets west can happen at the southern edge of this park. It also affords us an opportunity to look at possible ideas for programming in that area at a time where we never will have this opportunity again. So I think from the Parks Subcommittee's recommendation, it was one of common sense that it was time to look at that and ask Hargraves to include that in their scope. And it passed unanimously to come here today for your review.
With the approval of this item, we would send it on to council for their approval and authorization to begin this process.
Is there any kind of an increase in the fee for this?
Yes, there would be an additional fee.
Okay. Okay. Is there a motion? Or, I'm sorry, Mike, go
I have a
ahead.
question, I guess. We say this connection with the river is not part of the MAPS Park. I mean, what's defined the boundary of the MAPS Park? Why can't that be incorporated in the MAPS Park?
That is the boundary that has been determined as where the MAPS 3 funds will be expended
Determined by
council.
By council.
Something else that it also affords the opportunity is the city's Parks and Recreation Department begin to develop Wiley Post right on the other side of the river, and then Wheeler Park to the west. It begins to help them see how they can build connectivities and best use the GO bond money that's available for that park, and have a sense of continuity so that, possibly someday you could walk from the core of downtown all the way to the south edge of Wiley Post Park. So again, it's one of those big scope, big picture opportunities that I think give advantages not only today, but 15, 20, 30 years down the road.
Okay. Do we have a motion? All in favor? Opposed? The motion has been passed. Item 9. Recommended resolution approving final specifications for demolition bidding package 2, Upper Downtown Public Park, and authorizing the city clerk to advertise for bids. Project M3P007. David?
Madam Vice Chairman, as we continue along with the progress of the park, this is the next phase that we're entering, and that is some demolition of some buildings and structures that are city property now. You have in your packet Attachment A site plan that shows the Block 1 and Block 2. Block 1 would be demolition of the buildings, fences, lights, those kind of things in that block. Then Block 2 is really not so much demolition, but it's mostly cleanup. There are chunks of concrete, debris and things in there that we anticipate will continue to give us problems with mowing this summer, so we need to get those cleaned up. So as I said, this is a continuation of the process that we're going into. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions?
This again was passed with the recommendation of the Parks Subcommittee at our meeting yesterday.
All in favor? Opposed? The recommendation has been approved. Item number 10, recommended resolution approving preliminary report for MAPS 3 Oklahoma River, Phase 1 Race Course Windscreen, Project M3R001.
Madam Vice Chairman, this is part of Phase 1 of the river development and part of the facilities for the race course. And we have Mr. Rand Elliott here today to give us a presentation on the windscreen preliminary report.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for allowing us to be here today. As I sit in the audience and listen to all the great things going on in Oklahoma City, it's just an amazing time to be here. I'm sure we all share that same experience. I have the pleasure of talking about the windscreen, the Oklahoma River Windscreen Project. And as a reminder, the goal, of course, for the windscreen project is to mitigate and reduce the amount of wind gusting across the Oklahoma River to improve the level of fairness related to racing for canoe, kayak, rowing, all of those particular things. And so we have developed a plan to create a windscreen that is modular in nature, meaning that it has the ability to add to at any given time or shrink, depending on the situation that we find ourselves in related to cost and so forth. And so the sections are a little challenging to read, so let me go on and just share this. We are contemplating a number of alternates, and we're at the preliminary report part of our project, which is about 35% of it and represents design development in essence. And we are investigating things like material finishes and color and so forth. And this particular one, if you'll notice in the right-hand corner, says mill finish aluminum panel. Maintenance is of utmost importance for this project for a long term, and we have been investigating any number of finishes, including mill finish aluminum, which means that it's basically a raw aluminum finish, does not rust, does not require paint or anything. And then we're also investigating the second image, which shows it in a painted finish, and there are a number of very sophisticated painting systems that are available to us, and those would be investigated during the process of imagining alternates. So again, you kind of see the first version, I've skipped back, it has a silvery quality. The second version is white. Both of these colors would be compatible with the vocabulary of the existing location. Again, just a closer up detail, if you'll recall in our previous presentations, we have a 10-foot area below that's open, and then the screen itself is 30 feet, so the gross dimension is 40 feet in height. And if you recall, our purpose for this was to block the predominantly southern wind. And the way the wind basically works is that it strikes this, and it goes above it, and what happens is that it ricochets over the screen itself and lands at a position out beyond the river. What you would like is for it to land on the other side of the river, which would allow the wind itself to be deflected. And what we've done here is that we've actually created an opening at the bottom that makes the amount of air circulation equal or equivalent. And in our conversations with Mike Knopp about all of the events that go on at the river, the most important thing that we have is the ability to make sure that we ensure fairness, and that's really the important part. And currently, if you were going to be at the river, you would notice on the southern edge that it's glassy. As you get a little bit further to the north side of the river, it would be more ripples, and so that represents activity on the surface caused by wind. And the goal is to make it uniform, whether it's all ripples or all glassy. The idea is to create a uniformity. So again, we're seeing alternate finishes. The basic structure follows as closely as we can the property line for the south side of the river. You'll notice that it has a very interesting kind of sinuous quality as it moves down through here, and we're doing that because the property line moves in and out. And we have an interesting position at one point through here where we're trying to pinch between the OG&E easement and the property line. And here it is again in the mill finished version and the white version. And again, a close-up detail. It's a structural series of members vertically, 24 feet apart. That creates the modularity I was mentioning to you. We can add 24-foot sections or reduce it by 24-foot sections. And the sections above are similarly broken down into modular panels. This is the rear part of it, and it's an interesting position because if you'll notice to the right, you'll see that the structural members are angular in its back leg, and then you'll notice that a series of them are straight. And this is what we are calling the pinch point along the south side of the river where the OG&E easement and the property line come together very closely. And this would be the approach to it. It's not an economic impact point at all. It's just a design feature that allows us to move past obstructions along the south side of the river. And then we've represented a couple of versions here. One of the goals and expectations was that this screen could become a projection screen opportunity, and we're investigating a number of things. We have two here, and I'm sorry that it's not quite as easily seen in the environment here, but the first one is as if there are no supplemental lights or ambient light along the south side of the river. The second one is as if the lighting for the river events is on and it's supplementary. The interesting thing about this is that the screens or projections or imagery could be 500 meters long if you wanted it. And part of the thing that Mike Knopp has asked about is the ability to do literally racing in real time, and you'd have the opportunity to perhaps project images. There's any number of opportunities for events like Dead Center Film Festival and so forth. we're investigating notions about how best to project these images and how they are most clearly seen. Our schedule is roughly a year's worth of time. We're at, in essence, DD, or preliminary report right now, and you can see the process, including bidding and construction time, at about 305 days. And then finally, and I won't go into this in great detail, you have, I think, copies of this. This is just our way of putting together this alternates list, and the idea is to represent and study all sorts of optional things, everything from how we might light the screens to the finish on the panels themselves. And it's there to help us control budget. It's also there to consider opportunities as the project is completed. I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Any questions?
I just have one.
Sure.
Would this much aluminum interfere with cell phones?
To our knowledge at this moment, the answer is no. This is one piece of it. It's not, cell phone coverage is an atmospheric kind of thing. This is a sliver, if you will, and very small compared to the volumes of requirements for cell phone coverage.
Motion? Mike?
Yes, this comes to the committee with a recommendation from the River Subcommittee, and so I would move approval.
Thank you.
Second? Yes. All in favor? Opposed? The recommended resolution is approved. Thank you, Rand.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Item 11, recommended resolution approving site evaluation and conceptual design report for the MAPS 3 Oklahoma River Phase 3 Whitewater Facility, Project M3R004.
Madam Vice Chairman, continuing on with projects at the river, this is a very exciting project we have, and this is a conceptual design report. It's not a preliminary report, but they were, S2O, the consultant, was asked to look at certain things because of the issues around the property before we go full-blown design-wise. So Mr. Jeffrey Guston with S2O is here to give us a presentation on his conceptual design.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be here again. The focus of the presentation today will be, although we have our finalizing report for the pre-design, conceptual, and site evaluation task 1 of our contract, I'm going to focus primarily on our conclusions, recommendations, and the costs, which we did not address pre-holidays. So with that, I will talk just generally to the design of the project. Our conceptual master plan is on the screen for you. Part of the concept plan includes a world-class whitewater facility that has 4 unique channels to it. Support facilities including a main building which will host your administration, ticketing, your office, your facility management, restaurants, locker facilities. And then you'll have an array of 4 supporting buildings, anywhere from a rafting storage facility, orientation pavilion, which is an open-air structure for essentially safety instructions for 30 to 60 patrons. And then you have to the far east the kayak building, which will host our hard boat operations. And then the pump house, which divides the top and bottom pools. The final building, the triangular shape along the river, is a future building opportunity as we're identifying as a south pavilion. And then what's not shown on here but labeled to the top is the parking. To the north of 5th Street, we have planned 300 paid parking spaces and then additional grass overflow parking. This, again, is just kind of a schematic of the channel system itself. It identifies 4 unique channel experiences. The lower pond essentially is being used as a beginner channel experience, low gradient, instructional type use, basically for the integration and of the safety provisions and identification of basically the provisions for moving through the course. As you travel through the bottom channel, there's a a fully operational conveyor that will take you to the top pond, and then there's a selection of 2 channels from there. The recreational channel being a more low gradient channel, the competition channel being much more aggressive and also one for hosting events. Both channels flow back around to the main building and then once again join at what we're calling the freestyle channel. This is a typical cross-section through the slalom channel. You'll see the gate structures above that tie into either side. There'll be a hardscape on either side for instructional training, for the coaches to go back up and forth, as well as an area to the side for trail systems for the public. All points along the course itself through the buildings will all be ADA accessible. We'll have 0 entries into the pool, as well as stepped entries and seating areas as well. A couple more sections through the channel, actually one more section through the channel. This is the competition channel would be the left, the recreational channel to the right, and then essentially a bermed mound between the two with an offset crown. We essentially have shade trees more towards the recreational channel, and trying to take advantage of the competition channel landscaping for seated events, have stepped seating in here, and then areas along here as well for trail connectivity. Down below is a conceptual sketch of the front entry plaza. Essentially the main building would be to the left, and then the main fountain and access point would be through the center. Again, these are conceptual sketches, pretty much massing of the architecture that we plan to deploy. The top image is of the kayak storage facility, which again is the far eastern building on the site. It is adjacent to the upper pool, and behind is I-35. This is essentially a 1.5-story structure, open air for 2/3 of the space for basically hard boat storage. The remainder of the space is for facility management operations and for staffing. And then we're looking at an iconic 2.5-story structure towards the end of the building facing I-35, again, maybe lighted at night to kind of give a focal point along I-35. And the bottom image here is of our entry, so the street intersection here would be 6th and Phillips Avenue, and you're seeing the building on the left being the main building, again, the ticketing administration, lockers, restaurant facility. Main entrance through here, your fountain structure between, and then to the right would be the South Pavilion, which we're labeling as a future pavilion opportunity with a connecting canopy to the two buildings. The part of our study for the main building was also looking at possibility of expansion. So we're looking at the main building, which is 18,000 square feet on the ground floor, providing the structural design inclusive in phase 1 to basically be able to expand the facility to a second floor in future use. So a lot of our pre-design efforts were focusing on the technical issues of the project. What are the pitfalls that we might befall us going forward, and trying to understand those so that we can certainly move forward at a rapid pace. So there's a host of issues here. Most of those are utility or land related. I'll just kind of highlight those real quick. First is a sanitary sewer. There's an existing 54-inch sewer main that runs 5th Street and runs along the channel. Essentially, we had 2 design decisions here, either relocate it, significant cost upwards of $1 million, or essentially try to design the course within the existing infrastructure. So what you're seeing is the second option, where you have designed the course to fit within the land available south of 5th Street with no disturbance to the existing 54-inch sewer main. So at present, there is no conflict. The second issue with utilities was the power lines, or is the power lines. 2 issues here. They're, again, along 5th Street, overhead distribution lines, and then along the river, overhead transmission lines, both by OG&E. The city has had conversations with OG&E. Both lines will be removed. It's an issue of time and cost at the moment, so neither will be an issue for us moving forward on the project. Another utility-like issue for us is the floodplain. We're well within the floodplain. We have 2 issues related to the design with the floodplain. One is building elevation. All buildings will be above the floodplain as required. They'll essentially be the same floor elevation as the existing boathouse structures at 1177. The second issue being the channel itself being in the 50-year floodplain. If you will, the edge of our channel, which is called the pool deck, essentially we'll be building the bottom of our pool, the top of our pool deck a foot above the 50-year floodplain. So again, no issues here. We've had conversations with Public Works, and we can accommodate the design within the floodplain. Grading. Grading is a big issue for the project. I mean, the first 6 months of the project is moving dirt. So at this point, even though we would typically do this in schematic design, we looked at it in conceptual design to see essentially how we can balance the site and essentially, move forward with, again, with the floodplain issues and making sure that we can grade the site out. So again, no issues at present on this. We have not done any soil studies at the moment, so there are some unforeseen possibilities as we move forward, but we feel confident at this moment that there are no grading issues. Oil wells, consistent with Oklahoma City, there's 3 oil wells that we know on site. From the investigation we've done at this moment, again, minus subsoil exploration, we do not see any issues with capping these and any soil contamination. The last issue related to the utilities and the impacts of the site is the water. We've talked about this a few times now. The source of the water as well as the quality of the water, regulations associated with that. The source of the water is city municipal water. We'll fill the 12 to 13 million gallon bathtub, so to speak, on day one with city municipal water. And then we have a daily top-off requirement that essentially would be filled with city well water, which we'll drill on site. We haven't done the drilling yet. Again, through pre-investigations, we think the water quality will be, at recreational standards, so we will be using a well for the top-off. And then the second issue regarding the water is the actual quality and the standards related to that. We've had exhaustive conversations with both the Department of Health at the state level and county, as well as the Department of Labor. Department of Labor will be reviewing this and regulating this as an amusement ride. It's a little bit counterintuitive what it actually is, but they will be the primary jurisdictional authority. And essentially the agreement we have with them is because there is no true standard to develop this as certainly it's not a commercial swimming pool, we will basically be providing a best management practices. We'll essentially set the standard. A lot of that will be driven off of what we did in Charlotte and what has been done in other similar scenarios. So we present the case, they review it, and they'll have the final say on the regulations. Planning and zoning, really not much to talk about here. We do not have any on-site parking requirements for the zoning. However, we are providing ample parking because we'll have ample patron load. So we're looking at 300 paid parking spaces in first phase with 100 grass overflow, and then there's ample space for additional overflow parking in the future. Land, we talked about this as well. Essentially, our recommendation is there's 11.4 acres of privately owned land. There's 2.5 acres of state-owned land, and then the rest is owned by the city. We recommend to the city that all land be purchased at this moment. It can either is used for the development or for the future expansion of the facility. And then project cost. We didn't talk about this last time, so I'll spend a little bit more time on this. In short, we're in budget. We're conceptual in nature, so essentially what we've done is we've reviewed the project and put the project scope in line with where the budget is. So what that means is there are opportunities for future expansion of the project. What you have in the base budget is land acquisition cost, you have site cost, parking, you have site amenities, you have the development of the site, costs associated with that. You have the buildings for the main building at 18,000 square feet. You have 4 ancillary buildings totaling about 6,000 square feet with the pump station as well. So we're about 25,000 square feet in total building square footage. And you have essentially landscaping and various site amenities. Outside of that, we have probably we have about $7 million in alternatives that we will look at through the subsequent design. Additional programming via splash pads, additional programming for the whitewater, additional building space. So we'll be analyzing that as we move forward. And then schedule. The project schedule is essentially a 26-month schedule, and there's a bit of science to when we open. You can open up year-round, being that this will be a year-round operation, but the goal is to essentially open up similar to a water park, where you're opening up in April, and essentially you're seeing your high season through the summer, and then obviously it shoulders off in the late October, November seasons. You don't want to open up on April 1st, so you want to have a soft opening. We recommend about 60 days to get that soft opening done, all the training, all the configuration of the channels, training your safety staff, having the fire departments come out and understand how to operate the facility. So what we're looking at is essentially 24 months from now, so 2 years from now, having a soft opening in January, late January, February, and then a grand opening in April. And to do that, we're essentially saying 9 months from beginning of March in design, we're letting the contract out at the end of the year. We'll have bids and be able to put a shovel in the dirt, so to speak, early next year. With that, I'll take your questions or comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Any questions?
I just have another wow. Great job, very comprehensive and very well thought out, and Mike Knopp, thank you again for your dream.
Anyone else? Is there a second? All in favor? Opposed? Resolution has been passed. Thank you very much. Item 12, recommended approval of the draft final plans and specifications for the MAPS 3 Oklahoma River Phase 2 Project 1 improvements, and that's Project M3R005.
Madam Vice Chairman, this is a part of Phase 2, continuing on with the river projects. Johnson Associates has been engaged to do the design of Phase 2, but we have a unique situation. There are several projects that are currently underway at the river, and the river has been lowered so that these projects can be constructed. There's a sewer line, and there's the Zone G canal. We also have some things that need to be built, and would be best if they're built without the water in the river. So we've accelerated part of Johnson Associates' improvements, if you will, his plans, so that we can meet the deadline, and we're still trying to beat that deadline. I think the river will be coming up in late March, sometime around there. So what you have before you is draft plans. These are not completed plans, but they're draft plans. The spirit of the work is there, and Mr. Johnson is here to talk about that, but we're asking you to approve draft plans. As soon as the draft plans are completely finalized, they'll go to council for final approval and advertisement for construction. The reason we're doing this is we can't wait another month because of this river lowering issue, and we're about a week away from getting this done. So I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Johnson. He can give you some details.
Good morning. Tim Johnson with Johnson Associates. Happy to be here. You've seen a lot of really nice things today. This is really kind of the back of the house. This is the improvements we're proposing on this will be all under the water when we're done. And then the rest of the Phase 2 improvements will be things that you can ooh and ah over, I hope. So anyway, you can see the markings for the various race events. Basically, at each one of these locations, we're crossing the river with a set of conduits, a bundle of conduits that will provide for power, communication, video, things like that, that the river operator or the event operators need to communicate with towers that will be constructed on the south side. In addition to that, we are proposing a new cabling system. It's called an albino cabling system that interconnects with the lane markings the ability to use the starting gates that the city has already acquired. So they'll move from one starting point to another. All of that is underground items. So we need to get the underwater stuff improved, the electronic conduits I mentioned, the anchoring system, and then we are also adding the additional boat ramps along the south bank. Just by example, the draft plans, as you see them, these are very hard to read, of course. These are just identifying the locations of where we have to put in some stone anchoring, concrete anchoring, and then the conduits that will also have to be ballasted to keep them from floating out. Typical cross-section here of where that'll be located. The wide area is gravel for the anchoring system to sit on. The conduit is the dash line ahead of it. This is an example of one of the boat ramps. This is an existing boat ramp at around the 500-meter location that the city uses now. It's just a drainage swale. We're going to pave this and make some adjustments to the access drive so that it can be more easily used. Currently, the gates they have now are being taken out manually. They have guys down there pulling them out of the water. This will allow for a all-terrain vehicle to pull them out. Another one of our locations is at the 1,000 meters, a little more difficult in that we are between the northbound, southbound lanes on I-35. So this is a little more of an elaborate installation due to the fact we want to minimize our impact to ODOT's property. And then the last ramp we're proposing is near the 2,000-meter mark. And again, because we're abutting the Indian property, we have proposed a more elaborate boat ramp area at this location. A typical cross-section of the concrete improvements, just massive blocks of concrete that will hold down the tension of the cables as they're pulled and winched across for each lane. In summary, the work will be, we're going to do is the most that we can do with the water down, and then the rest of the work in Phase 2 will be done as part of Project 2. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
I just have one comment, Tim, and that oftentimes there's more complications in the back of the house, more things going on in the front of the house, and I think we're all learning to have great appreciation for that as well. So,
Understand.
Any more? All in favor? Opposed? Has been approved. Thank you very much. Do you have something, David?
We have nothing further.
Okay. Item 13, discussion action on MAPS 3 programs.
We don't have anything, Madam Chairman.
All right, thank you. We'll go on to the item number 14, MAPS 3 Citizens Advisory Board Subcommittee reports. Quickly, Fairgrounds, Bob? Okay, Nathaniel? Say nothing? Okay. Mike, do you think we need to add anything?
Well, no, obviously, the River Subcommittee has been several projects going on, and
Yes.
as you saw today, and have a lot of things planned over the next few months, and so looking forward to all the activity.
Okay, well, good.
the Park Subcommittee, as we heard, met yesterday and improved many of the things we saw today, and certainly we have, I believe, over 20 meetings with Hargraves this week and all the stakeholders and different departments, and kudos to the MAP staff.
Yes, good jobs. And seniors, we didn't have a subcommittee meeting, did we?
No, but this afternoon there will be a meeting of hopefully all of the bidders for this first Senior Health and Wellness Center operating partner, and we'll get a sense of how many community folks out there are interested in working with the city on this first Senior Wellness Center.
And that's where again? I'm sorry.
It's 2 o'clock this afternoon. Where is it, David? 10th floor?
Here?
10th floor of the 420 building.
Okay. All right, thank you. And item 15, any informational items, MAPS 3 property acquisition?
Madam Vice Chairman, you have in your packet the status of the acquisition map on the Upper Park. It's much like we've seen for the last couple of months. The only thing that we don't really control right now is the northeast corner, and it's currently in litigation. So we continue on with that and hope to have that finished soon.
Okay, and this time, David, do we have any other updates and status of any of the MAPS 3 programs?
Madam Vice Chairman, I'd like to just reiterate for the citizens and everyone out there, as far as the river, the race course lighting is under construction, and that continues. And we saw the windscreen preliminary report today. That will be sent on to council. The Whitewater will soon begin their preliminary design. We saw the conceptual design today. And Phase 2 improvements that Mr. Johnson talked about are in design. The senior wellness, Mr. Dover mentioned there is a pre-proposal meeting today at 2 o'clock. That's for the operating partner request for proposals. Trails and sidewalks, Phase 1 of the sidewalks are in design. 2 sections of the river trails, which is the complete river trail, are in design, and right-of-way acquisition continues on that. Convention Center, conceptual design continues. There's been many meetings that were very similar to the park with focus groups that are ongoing with that, so that continues. Fairgrounds Phase 1 grading continues at the fairgrounds itself. Design of Phase 1 improvements continue. Expo Center design will soon begin, as you saw the agreement for A&E today. Transit project requirements were approved by council since our last meeting. Work on the analysis of the line is underway, and analysis of the Adventure line is underway with Jacobs Engineering, and purchase of the Santa Fe station for the intermodal hub is underway. Park, we saw a lot today on the park. Design of the master plan continues. We've had the 2 public meetings I mentioned, many focus group meetings, and there's the 3rd public meeting tonight, 6 o'clock Ron Norick Library, 4th floor. And as we just saw with the math land acquisition, continues on Upper Park. So we've got a lot of things still going on.
We do, absolutely. And now's the time when we have anyone on, any citizens or anyone that would like to say anything, address the group. Do we have any comments? Okay, with that in mind, we need a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you all very, very much for coming today.